Mr. Louis Ng.
Sir, I've spoken up many times for a green Singapore. Last year, I wore green in this House during our debate on sustainability and the environment. And I've literally gone green by painting my face and my hands completely green to show how serious Nee Soon is in cutting our carbon emissions. Don't worry, sir, I promise I won't be painting my face or hand during this speech. But I'm heartened to see that Singapore has become greener in all aspects of life. We now have the Singapore Green Plan 2030, the Singapore Green Building Master Plan, the Maritime Singapore Green Initiative, Singapore Green Bond Framework, and the Singapore Green Finance Centre. I thank the government for listening to and partnering with civil society and businesses to take bold action to green Singapore. As we keep getting greener, let's also not forget the other important colour, blue. Today, Ms. Nadia Ahmad Samdin and I will be speaking up for our blue nature spaces. I will be calling for greater protection for our marine spaces, and Ms. Samdin will be focusing on one of our other important blue spaces, the Southern Islands. Let me start by talking about why our marine ecosystems are important. The first reason is biodiversity. We have a rich ecosystem of mangroves, mudflats, coral reefs, intertidal zones, and seagrass meadows. We're home to 25% of world's coral species, 55% of mangrove plants in Asia, and 52% of seagrass species in the Indo-Pacific. And these numbers may continue to increase as we discover and rediscover more species. The Neptune cut sponge, thought to be globally extinct, was rediscovered near St. John's Island in 2011. Just last year, we discovered 3 new species of moss animal in the Sisters Island Marine Park. I'm glad that the government is joining the world in protecting this rich biodiversity. At last year's COP15 UN Biodiversity Conference, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted to conserve 30% of the world's land, coastal areas, and oceans by 2030. Singapore has committed to contribute to these global targets, and I'm glad that once again, Singapore is playing a role as a responsible international party. The second reason our marine ecosystems are important is climate change. Marine ecosystems trap carbon and keep it from worsening climate change. How much carbon? Looking at just our mangroves, a 2015 study found that they contain as much carbon as the annual emissions of 620,000 people. Mangroves also help in adaptation efforts against sea level rise, and coral reefs reduce wave energy. Such nature-based solutions against climate change can provide over 1/3 of the mitigation needed to achieve net zero by 2050. They need to be part of our roadmap to net zero. To help these marine ecosystems be our swords and shields against climate change, we should protect them. How can we further protect our marine spaces? I have 3 proposals to learn more, protect more, and restore what we have lost. These are not my ideas, but what our young researchers and activists, Sam Suchin, Ines Alsagoff, and Samantha Tien are calling for. Many of our marine advocates are up in the gallery, and this is their adjournment motion. The first proposal is to learn more about our marine spaces. We have many passionate scientists who are studying our marine spaces. One such scientist is Sam. She is a coral scientist who has been actively studying our coral reefs. Scientists like Sam are working hard to study our marine spaces. However, there remain gaps in our knowledge, and they need the government's support to continue and intensify their work. Our last marine biodiversity survey was in 2015. The last edition of the Singapore Red Book data book list on species in Singapore was in 2008. Our database of knowledge is due for an update. I hope that the government can provide support to and work with researchers to update and plug gaps in our existing knowledge on our marine ecosystems. Knowledge can be translated into action. In addition to her research work, Sam co-founded our Singapore Reefs, which connects marine enthusiasts through diving and raises awareness on marine biodiversity through outreach programs. She tells me, quote, "I envision a future where we can all work hand in hand to create spaces where wildlife can coexist with humans. Together with our research, conservation, and community initiatives, we can better safeguard our native biodiversity and keep our ecosystems healthy with more legislation, funding support, and long-term partnership from the government." Unquote. The second proposal is that as we learn more about our marine spaces, we also take steps to protect these spaces. We should designate more marine areas as nature reserves or marine parks. Nature spaces that are designated as marine reserves, national parks, or public parks enjoy protection under the Parks and Trees Act. Nature reserves and national parks get the most protection, Any changes to their boundary can only be amended after debate in Parliament. But public parks like marine parks don't enjoy the same level of protection. Their boundaries can be redrawn without the scrutiny of Parliament. This is not just a hypothetical possibility. In 2001, the government had already finalized plans to reclaim the Chek Jawa wetlands. This unique habitat, home to mudskippers, dugongs, herons, and otters, was on the verge of being destroyed. But these plans were suspended only after activists commissioned a biodiversity survey, wrote their own report, and submitted a petition to the government. It was a shining day for activism, but we should not protect our marine spaces only when ordinary people take extraordinary action. These areas deserve statutory protection. Which areas should we protect? As our first marine park, Sisters Island Marine Park should receive more protection by elevating it to a nature reserve. The waters around the islands of Pulau Ubin, Pulau Semakau, Pulau Hantu, Pulau Jong, Pulau Biola, Pulau Satumu, St. John's Island, Kusu Island, and Lazarus Island are all rich in biodiversity and have great potential as marine parks. I hope we can designate these areas as marine parks first, before subsequently considering them to be nature reserves. These waters are familiar to Ines, who is an avid diver and a nature guide. She shared this with me, quote, "As a frequent diver, I've had the opportunity to conduct research with NUS and explore Singapore's southern islands. I have witnessed firsthand the remarkable biodiversity present in our waters, including sightings of black-tipped reef sharks, blue-spotted fantail rays, large groupers, and vibrant coral ecosystems. I strongly believe that we need to take action to protect our marine spaces and ensure their conservation for future generations," unquote. The third proposal is that we go beyond protecting what we have to restoring what we have lost. Our community of activists is working hard on the ground to protect our marine spaces. Samantha Thien, who founded Sustainable, is one such activist. Sustainable is a social enterprise supporting marine conservation in the region. On seeing the amount of trash and pollution on our beaches, Samantha started a Telegram group to organize beach cleanups, gathering hundreds of volunteers. This has now grown to thousands of cleanups. While our local community works hard to protect our beaches, I hope the government can match their efforts a little further from the beach. We can start by restoring our degraded seagrass meadows. Currently, the Tropical Marine Science Institute is studying the restoration of marine habitats, such as seagrass meadows. While seagrass may not receive as much attention as coral reefs, they are crucial as carbon sink, home to rich biodiversity, improve water quality, and protect our coast. Seagrasses are 35 times faster than tropical rainforests in capturing carbon. They're also nurseries to fishes and feed marine creatures such as parrotfish, turtles, and dugongs. Despite their importance, we have lost 1.6 square kilometers, or about half of our seagrasses, since the 1960s. It's critical that we not just protect, but restore our degraded seagrass meadows. The largest meadows today are found at Chek Jawa, Pulau Semakau, and Cyrene Reef. There are also substantial meadows in the waters of Pulau Pawai, Labrador Beach, Pasir Ris Beach, Changi Beach, and Pulau Sekudu. I hope the government can support efforts to restore seagrass meadows in these areas. Lastly, sir, activists are also asking for specific updates on the proposed recommendations in the SG Blue Plan 2018, which they called, quote, "a labor of love from civil society," unquote. Activists have proposed comprehensive recommendations to maintain and conserve our local marine environment. To conclude, sir, I hope we can respond to the calls of our young advocates to know our marine ecosystem better, protect what we currently have, and restore what we have lost, especially our seagrass meadows. These proposals level the playing field for nature when it comes to development decisions and give our wildlife and our waters a chance at survival. And doing so, we also increase humankind's chances of survival. So I was there at Chek Jawa as a young activist and student more than 2 decades ago. I saw the amazing biodiversity we were about to destroy at Chek Jawa, and it was painful to see what we were going to lose. But I also saw firsthand the tremendous dedication by the researchers, activists, and thousands of people, members of the public who stepped forward to speak up and fight for the protection of Chek Jawa. And I also saw how the government responded positively, reversed our decision, and protected Chek Jawa instead. I hope we continue to support our researchers and activists, continue to protect our marine spaces, and continue to save our nature areas. Let me end with a quote, as always, from Sylvia A. Earle, the former chief scientist of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Quote, "The oceans matter. If the sea is sick, we feel it. If it dies, we die. Our future and the state of ocean are one," unquote. Thank you, sir.
Ms. Nadia Samdin.
Sir, I join my colleague, the Honourable Member Mr. Louis Ng, in this adjournment motion, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I would like to zoom into a specific area, namely the Southern Islands. Over the years, like you, I've had the opportunity to volunteer as a cleanup diver and kayaked around our waters. And while what's under the surface may not always be front of mind, my time out on and in our waters has made me determined to play my part in our collective action. The Southern Islands refers to a cluster of islands and informal planning area to the south of mainland Singapore. It comprises Kusu, Lazarus, Seringat, St. John's, Sentosa, Tekukur, and the Two Sisters Islands. For some time, visitors were generally marine scientists, casual picnicker, Kusu pilgrims, nostalgic former islanders, or those in search of a trail off the beaten track. However, restlessness from COVID-19 piqued Singaporeans' interests. Visitorship on the island increased by 2.5 times, from 6,800 a month in 2019 to 17,000 a month in 2021. In 2022, URA conducted a long-term plan review and engaged more than 13,000 participants in polls, discussions, and webinars, which culminated in roving exhibitions. Together with some marine scientists and environmental advocates, I toured the exhibition and was interested in how the LTPR highlighted the creation of an island of green, blue, and fun, I quote, by expanding nature-based recreation networks and embracing islandness. This includes plans to transform our southern islands. Sir, I agree it is important to embrace our islandness and increase recreational options for Singaporeans. While it is exciting to hear new plans and see Singaporeans engage in these nature spaces, the Southern Islands must be developed sensitively. Given that Southern Islands are more or less a blank slate, it would be exciting as well to test-bed sustainable ideas and learnings could be implemented on mainland Singapore. Some may wonder what is there to protect in the first place. The Southern Islands is significant in two key areas, natural and cultural heritage. The Southern Islands support coastal habitats with several nationally vulnerable or endangered species. It is also home to rich culture and history. The islands were part of the lively settlements of Orang Laut, and former islanders have religious significance and hosted Singapore's first quarantine centre when we're talking about COVID-19 today. Given the natural and cultural significance of the Southern Islands, I appreciate the efforts of NParks, which engages and consults stakeholders, and the URA for adopting a science-based approach to stewarding green and blue spaces through the ecological profiling exercise. The EPE showed that the Southern Islands is a space where development should be considered sensitively. Based on these findings, I ask that we consider how best to ensure the careful integration of conservation and development in our plans. So our varied interests and land needs are outsizing the 719 km square or so of our main island. In recent times, we have seen two activities introduced. First, aquaculture activities taken over by Barramundi Asia Group just beyond Bendera Bay. I note that the SFA had completed an EIA before implementation. How does the government measure ongoing water and sediment quality as well as the potential presence of larger predators, given that the fish cages are barely 50 meters from Bendera Bay, which is stewarded by Friends of Marine Park? How are aquaculture sites selected? And are there any other sites around the Southern Islands which are being considered for the future? What are the measures and safeguards which the government requires of companies to minimize damage to the seabed, including the anchoring of cages and monitoring of feed spills? Is there ongoing assessment as to the extent of natural habitats and water flows in both the short and medium term? I appreciate that aquaculture is a very important part of our food resilience goals and hope that we can establish good practices and standards around it before further expansion. Second, Big Tiny's Tiny Away Escape was launched, which will start taking bookings very soon. Like the throngs who flocked to the Southern Islands during COVID-19, staycations were also a popular activity during COVID. I think opportunities for Singaporeans to connect with nature are good, especially for our young, who are more likely to fall in love with our environment if they're familiar with it. I echo comments from the marine community that I sincerely appreciate the Sentosa Development Corporation's consideration in this less intrusive accommodation option. I also appreciate that SDC carried out stakeholder engagements, and I would be keen to understand what environmental and safety considerations are required of the operator, and whether any of the suggestions during consultation have been adopted. I would also appreciate hearing what future plans are in developing the Southern Islands as a light-touch ecotourism destination. The balance between conservation and development requires tighter coordination between the multitude of government agencies involved in the island's management. For illustration, island and land permits are currently managed by the SLA, and parks is involved in conservation, for example, through the Sisters Island Marine Park, and also the conservation of heritage tree and development of trails. While STB looks after the development of the island into a light-touch tourist destination, the MPA of Singapore governs the rest of the waters which surrounds the island. While I appreciate the good work of each of these agencies, it may be difficult to have a holistic understanding of the island's development and ensure that any changes are done sensitively. So I seek clarification if there is a main liaison that supports coordination between the ministries on the island's land use development and management and is responsible for ensuring that any potential plans are sensitive to the environment and safety. I propose for an interagency work group with perhaps URA leading it to ensure systematic coordination between various stakeholders, utilizing the technical expertise of each stakeholder. As recommended in the Singapore Blue Plan 2018, the interagency work group could then develop processes relating to the island's use, implement a structured approach to manage competing land and ocean use, as well as oversee EIAs and the island's development plans. A clear checklist could be developed to identify environmental considerations to be assessed before any land or sea use is approved. And given the technicality of such environmental assessments, there is potential to crowd in expertise and public participation through a technical work group or panel. This would support the implementation of a well-coordinated and comprehensive plan to ensure that any development is sustainable and science-based. I sincerely hope that the government considers this suggestion. I have some further questions. First, on zoning. Given that Southern Islands are near marine and coastal areas, was an EIA conducted to understand and mitigate potential impact of the new developments such as tiny homes on the area? How does the coastal and ecological profiling exercise by the URA inform development in the Southern Islands? In light of the plans to develop Southern Islands sensitively, we can refer to preliminary research, horizon mapping, and integrated concept plan for St. John's Island, developed by Dr. Jani Tanzil and the team at SJIML, funded by the NRF. Using participatory mapping, the team came up with a preliminary proposal of both sea and land use zonings to create an environmentally friendly multi-use space for many stakeholders. Such zonings are in line with developing the island while ensuring that sensitive areas are kept protected. Potential areas include education, research, tourism, religious, cultural, conservation, sea sports, fishing, aquaculture, and even military. I would like to ask if the government has considered this piece of research. Second, on carrying capacity. With increasing developments on the island, more Singaporeans and tourists are visiting. Has there been any research to estimate the carrying capacity of the islands, and are there limits or caps to the number of visitors on the island at any one point? In nature areas such as Kranji marshes, permits for large groups are required for similar reasons. I hope that the government could consider a similar concept to be rolled out on the islands. Next, on safety. What are some efforts made to ensure the safety of and environmentally friendly practices of visitors? For example, signs to indicate strong currents for safe enjoyment in the waters, and evacuation plans in the case of emergency. Visitors to the island will also be familiar with the long-tailed macaques which inhabit the island. Has the government considered how human-wildlife conflict will be minimized, especially if the families on staycation bring food and snacks with them? I would also like to know who the enforcement authority is for safety and operations on the island. Perhaps it will also be helpful to place lifebuoys at prominent locations or even consider a lifeguard during peak periods to prevent incidents of drowning. Next, on waste. I applaud the efforts of
You have 1.5 minutes left.
to provide sustainable living by powering houses through solar, building using sustainable materials, and providing biogesters. While efforts seek to lower the carbon footprint of tourists, are there any sewerage treatment and waste disposal plans to cope with the overall increased human traffic and corresponding waste generated on the islands? Sir, we recognize that it is a tough balancing act for Singapore with intense land use pressures as a city-state and the need to balance conservation and natural heritage as well. To be clear, this isn't about no development, but an appeal for clear processes and frameworks to encourage a science-based and coordinated approach between government agencies in doing so. Big changes can take place in the most unexpected and smallest of places. Let us be at the forefront as an island city-state in dealing with these issues. Beyond governmental bodies, many ground-up groups, individuals have dedicated their careers and free time to this. I would like to acknowledge in particular friends of marine parks such as Stefan, Dr. Zihan and the team behind the Blue Plan, Dr. Yani of SGIML, Sam and Tai Chong from our Singapore Reefs, who have shared their thoughts and hard work with me, as well as many others who champion giant clams, sharks, seagrass, clean shores and oceans. Our marine and reef ecosystem takes years to develop, but only a moment to destroy if we do not prioritize them. Let us take this step to protect what we have and ensure the sustainable development of our southern islands. Thank you.
Minister.
Sir, I thank Mr. Louis Ng and Ms. Nadia Samdin and our Blue activists for championing the protection of our marine environment and our southern islands. I only have 10 minutes, so I will be brief and may not be able to address all the questions that they've raised. As a small city-state, we will always have to balance conservation with our development needs. The pressures on our sea spaces are no less intense than on land. We are a home to a rich array of marine biodiversity, from hard coral and seagrasses to turtles and dugongs. The Port of Singapore is also a busy global transshipment hub, supporting our economy and the continued flow of global supply chains. Our coastal and marine areas are also used for many important activities, including offshore industry, aquaculture, tourism, recreation, and defense. As we balance these competing demands, we recognize that our marine ecosystems are an important part of our natural capital and agree with members that we must take collective action to conserve them. Through our Marine Conservation Action Plan, we seek to conserve our rich marine biodiversity. This comprehensive science-based approach is part of our broader Nature Conservation Master Plan, which sets out conservation strategies for both green and blue spaces. Over the years, NParks has been partnering experts, researchers, and the marine community to study and monitor the biodiversity in our waters. With the use of advanced modeling tools, as well as efforts such as the Comprehensive Marine Biodiversity Survey and the more recent Southern Islands Biodiversity Survey, we continuously update and deepen our knowledge base. This helps us to identify key marine habitats for protection. In 2014, we established the Sisters Island Marine Park in view of the area's important ecological functions and variety of marine life. The marine park is protected under the Parks and Trees Act, which prohibits the removal of biodiversity and restricts activities such as fishing, the collection of coral, and the mooring of boats, among others. I would like to assure Mr. Louis Ng that just like nature reserves, the boundaries of the marine park are set out in the schedule to the Act, and any changes would have to be presented to Parliament. In addition to protecting our key marine ecosystems, we are also actively enhancing them in close partnership with the community. For example, together with JTC and NUS, we are supporting the introduction of artificial reefs at the marine park to promote the restoration of its coral habitats. We also work closely with the multi-stakeholder Friends of the Marine Park, as well as volunteers to conserve and study native turtle species at the Turtle Hatchery on Small Sisters Island. Beyond the marine park, we also make use of science and data to prioritize threatened species for our recovery programs. Today, our efforts cover the Neptune's cup sponge, over 14 species of coral, and more. We will do more to protect our natural marine habitat and heritage. At this year's Committee of Supply debate, we announced our enhanced commitment to restore and enhance 80 hectares of habitats by 2030, up from 30 hectares previously. These efforts will also include coastal and marine habitats. Like Mr. Louis Ng, we recognize the importance of our seagrass meadows as carbon sinks and habitats for marine fauna. We have been partnering the marine community on a long-term survey of our species-rich seagrass meadows and are currently developing a restoration program for these habitats. And we are planning to expand our Plant a Coral, See the Reef program to rally more of our community around our efforts to establish and restore thriving reef habitats. We will also continue to ramp up our outreach and education efforts together with partners such as the Nature Society and the Waterways Watch Society. Through initiatives such as guided intertidal walks and citizen science programs, including our yearly biodiversity beach patrols, we will encourage even more Singaporeans to join us in celebrating and stewarding our amazing marine biodiversity. Across the board, our marine conservation efforts are underpinned by strong and active partnerships. One example of how ground-up efforts can make a meaningful difference is the Singapore Blue Plan, which Mr. Louis Ng mentioned earlier. I had the opportunity to attend the launch of the Blue Plan back in 2018 and was encouraged by the passion and dedication of the diverse stakeholders who contributed to it. Many of our actions to better understand and conserve our marine spaces are indeed aligned with the recommendations of the Blue Plan. For example, we are stepping up funding for marine research. Through the Marine Climate Change Science Program, we are investing $25 million to develop solutions that address the impacts of climate change on our marine ecosystems. We have recently started to award grants for the first 2 projects, and we look forward to catalyzing further advancement in this field. To strengthen the environmental impact assessment or EIA process, we are piloting the centralization of EIA consultants under NParks. This will ensure the rigor of EIAs, including for coastal and marine areas. And to facilitate collaboration among government, industry, and researchers in areas including marine conservation, MPA, or the Marine and Port Authority, launched the Geospace Sea Portal in 2019. This publicly accessible database harnesses and integrates marine and coastal geospatial data from various sources and can help parties work off a common set of information. This also ties in with Ms. Nadia Samdin's call for greater coordination across agencies to ensure that our Southern Islands are developed sensitively. We agree with her that proper coordination is important to ensure that we develop Singapore sustainably. Today, we already take a whole-of-government approach to coordinate our plans, from planning to implementation. Upstream in the planning process, environmental considerations are taken into account in our land use plans. URA regularly reviews our long-term plans with agencies and studies alternatives and trade-offs to optimize our land use plans. This includes working with developing agencies, such as the Sentosa Development Corporation, SDC, and the Singapore Food Agency, SFA, to evaluate proposals for ecotourism projects and fish farms. Our plans are also guided by science. As part of the long-term plan review, NParks conducted an EPE, or ecological profiling exercise, to gain a more comprehensive understanding of Singapore's island-wide ecosystem and ecological connectivity. Based on the findings, NParks will work with agencies, study how development can be undertaken sensitively, taking into consideration various habitats. For example, the Marine EPE will help to guide future developments, such as the placement of sea-based farms. When development plans are more firm, developing agencies undergo an in-depth consultation process and work closely with technical agencies to minimize the environmental impact for developments near or in an ecologically sensitive area. In the context of Lazarus Island, this also involves consulting technical agencies and SLA, the agency managing the island, to develop visitor management measures that ensure public safety and sustainable practices. Throughout the planning process, we engage
Minister, you have
nature
about
groups.
1.5 minutes left.
We engage nature groups and other stakeholders so that their inputs can be considered in the review of our plans. We've also developed an integrated urban coastal management framework that guides the planning and management of our coastal and marine habitats. The framework is put together by an interagency committee, including NParks, SFA, NEA, MPA, and PUB, and seeks to promote the sustainable development of our coastal and marine areas. Agencies will continue to work closely together, for example, to monitor and coordinate responses to oil spill incidents as part of this IUCM framework. We are committed to being responsible stewards of our coastal and marine spaces, including our southern islands. As we push on with these efforts, we encourage everyone to join us, share with us their views and ideas, and to ensure that our precious marine biodiversity is conserved for many generations to come.
The question is that Parliament do now adjourn. As many as are of that opinion say aye. To the contrary, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Pursuant to Standing Order 2.3 Alpha, I wish to inform honourable members that the sitting tomorrow will commence at 10:30 a.m. Order. Order.